My name is Marcel Ricci, and for 15 years I've been making my living from the sea, delivering yachts up and down the South American coast and teaching wealthy clients how to handle million-dollar sailboats. I'd crossed the Atlantic twice, weathered storms that had sent other captains running for port, and built a reputation for getting expensive boats to their destinations safely and on schedule. But nothing in 15 years of professional sailing prepared me for March 23rd, when I dismissed an old Argentine fisherman's warning about weather patterns he'd been reading for 60 years, and learned that hubris can kill you faster than any storm. The job started like dozens of others I'd taken over the years. The Esperanza was a 58-foot luxury catamaran owned by a Sao Paulo businessman who needed her delivered to Puerto Madero in Buenos Aires for the start of the racing season. It was a straightforward 1,200 nautical mile passage that should have taken about 10 days in normal conditions. My crew consisted of 3 experienced sailors: Ana Gutierrez, a 31-year-old Argentine marine engineer who'd been working yacht deliveries for 8 years, Roberto Silva, a 28-year-old Brazilian who'd learned to sail racing dinghies in Santos and had moved up to offshore sailing, and Lisa Morrison, a 35-year-old American who was working her way around the world as crew on various delivery jobs. The Esperanza was a beautiful boat, a modern lagoon catamaran with all the latest electronics, safety equipment, and creature comforts. Twin diesel engines, water maker, satellite communications, and weather routing software that could predict conditions days in advance. She represented everything that modern sailing technology could offer. We departed from Marina de Gloria in Rio on March 18th, with perfect weather conditions and a forecast that showed moderate winds and following seas for the entire passage. The Brazilian Weather Service was predicting a stable high-pressure system that would give us steady sailing conditions all the way to Argentina. "This is going to be an easy trip," Roberto said as we cleared Guanabara Bay and set course southwest toward Uruguay. "Perfect weather, following winds, and a fast boat. We'll be in Buenos Aires drinking wine by next weekend." The first 4 days lived up to that prediction. We sailed through moderate trade winds with following seas, making excellent time and enjoying the kind of sailing that reminded me why I'd chosen this profession. The Esperanza was fast and comfortable, and the crew worked together with the efficiency that comes from years of offshore experience. But on March 22nd, as we approached the waters off Uruguay, we encountered João Mendoza, a 68-year-old fisherman who'd been working these waters since he was 12 years old. João was anchored near the edge of the continental shelf in his 32-foot fishing boat, pulling in nets and preparing to head back to Montevideo. "Capitão," João called out as we passed within hailing distance. "You should not be going south today. Bad weather is coming." I reduced our speed and brought the Esperanza closer to his fishing boat to hear what he had to say. João looked like every old fisherman I'd ever met: weathered skin, hands shaped by decades of handling lines and nets, and eyes that seemed to see things beyond the horizon. "The weather forecast is good for the next 3 days," I replied, pointing to our navigation station where satellite weather data showed clear skies and moderate winds. "We're not expecting any bad weather." João studied our modern catamaran with its forest of antennas and electronics, then looked at the sky in a way that suggested he was reading information that wasn't available on any satellite feed. "The birds are flying the wrong way," he said, pointing toward a flock of seabirds that were heading northwest instead of their usual pattern. "And the water has the wrong color for this time of year." I looked at the ocean around us, which appeared normal in every way I could measure. The color seemed typical for offshore waters, the wave patterns were consistent with the wind direction, and our barometers showed stable pressure. Nothing suggested that dangerous weather was approaching. "We have satellite weather data," Anna explained to João, trying to be polite while demonstrating our technological superiority. "The computer models show high pressure and stable conditions for the next several days." João nodded politely, but his expression suggested he'd heard similar dismissals from modern sailors before and had watched them learn hard lessons about the difference between computer models and ocean reality. "Your machines see the sky," João said, gesturing toward our weather instruments. "But they don't see the sea. The sea is telling a different story today." The old fisherman pointed toward subtle changes in wave patterns that I hadn't noticed, variations in water color that were apparently significant to someone who'd spent 60 years reading ocean conditions, and cloud formations that looked normal to me but apparently carried meaning for someone who understood traditional weather signs. "What exactly are you predicting?" I asked, curious about his methods even though I didn't believe his conclusions. "Big storm," João replied simply. "Coming from the southwest, very fast, maybe tomorrow or the next day. Winds maybe 60-70 knots. Seas maybe 8-10 meters." The prediction was dramatic enough to be concerning if it were accurate, but it contradicted every piece of modern weather data we had access to. The satellite images showed no storm systems anywhere in the South Atlantic, and the pressure readings indicated stable conditions throughout the region. "Where exactly do you see this storm?" I asked, showing João our weather display with its satellite imagery and isobar charts. João studied our electronic weather information with the polite attention of someone who understood that younger people placed great faith in technology, even when that technology was providing incomplete information. "Your machines look down from space," João explained patiently. "But storms sometimes grow from below, from the water temperature and the currents that your satellites cannot see." It was an interesting theory, but it wasn't supported by any meteorological principles I'd learned during 15 years of professional sailing. Storm systems develop from atmospheric pressure differentials, temperature gradients, and other factors that are clearly visible on satellite imagery and predictable through computer modeling. "We appreciate the warning," I said diplomatically, "but we have commitments in Buenos Aires and our weather data shows safe sailing conditions." João nodded and began preparing to resume his fishing, but as we moved away from his boat, he called out one final warning that I would remember for the rest of my life. "Capitão, when the storm comes, remember that your machines cannot help you swim." We resumed our course toward Buenos Aires, and I found myself discussing João's warning with my crew. The consensus was that while the old fisherman was probably well-meaning, his traditional methods were no match for modern meteorological science. "These old guys have been predicting storms for decades," Roberto said as we reviewed our weather routing information. "Most of the time they're wrong, but people only remember the times they're right." Ana agreed, pointing out that our satellite communication system was receiving real-time updates from weather services in Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, none of which showed any indication of severe weather developing in our area. "If there was a significant storm system developing, the meteorologists would know about it," Ana said confidently. "We have global weather monitoring systems that can track storm development anywhere in the world." Lisa, who had more experience with local fishermen in various parts of the world, was slightly more cautious in her assessment. "Sometimes local knowledge includes information that doesn't show up in official forecasts," she said. "But João's prediction is so different from the official forecast that one of them has to be completely wrong." By evening, as we continued southwest through calm seas under clear skies, it seemed obvious that João's prediction had been incorrect. Our weather instruments continued to show stable conditions, and radio communications with other vessels in the area confirmed that conditions were normal throughout the region. "So much for the local weather prophet," Roberto joked as we enjoyed dinner in the Esperanza's comfortable salon. His 60 years of experience versus our satellite technology, and technology wins again. We all laughed at the old fisherman's dramatic prediction of 70-knot winds and 10-meter seas. But in less than 18 hours, we would discover that João's 60 years of reading ocean conditions had taught him to recognize warning signs that our sophisticated weather technology couldn't detect. The storm that was about to hit us wasn't predicted by any computer model, wasn't visible on any satellite image, and wasn't forecast by any official weather service. But it was real, it was massive, and it was moving toward us with a speed and intensity that would test every survival skill we possessed. By the time we realized that João had been right and we had been catastrophically wrong, it would be too late to do anything except fight for our lives against forces that didn't care about our degrees, our experience, or our confidence in modern technology. March 23rd dawned with conditions that seemed to vindicate our decision to ignore João's warning. The sun rose through clear skies, the wind remained steady from the northeast at 15 knots, and our weather instruments continued to show the stable high-pressure system that had been dominating the region for over a week. "Another beautiful day in paradise," Ana observed as she checked our position and updated our course. "We're making excellent time, should be in Buenos Aires 2 days early if these conditions hold." But as the morning progressed, I began noticing subtle changes that hadn't been apparent in our electronic weather data. The wave patterns were becoming slightly more confused, with swells arriving from directions that didn't match the current wind direction. The water color was changing in ways that were difficult to describe but definitely noticeable to someone who'd spent years observing ocean conditions. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing with these swells?" I asked Lisa, who was at the helm while I checked our weather routing system. "Yeah, there's definitely some cross seas developing," Lisa replied, adjusting our course slightly to improve our motion through the water. "But it's probably just leftover energy from weather systems that passed through days ago." The explanation made sense from a theoretical perspective, but something about the wave patterns bothered me in a way I couldn't articulate. After 15 years of professional sailing, I developed an instinct for reading sea conditions that went beyond conscious analysis, and those instincts were telling me that something was changing. At 10:30 a.m., I decided to update our weather information using our Iridium satellite connection. The latest forecasts from Brazilian, Argentine, and international weather services all continue to predict stable conditions, but I wanted to make sure we weren't missing any recent developments. The updated forecasts were consistent with what we'd been seeing all week: a stable high-pressure system, moderate winds, and generally favorable sailing conditions. But buried in the fine print of one weather model was a notation about possible rapid cyclogenesis in the southwestern Atlantic, with low confidence in timing and intensity. What's rapid cyclogenesis? Roberto asked when I mentioned the notation. It's when a storm system develops very quickly from conditions that didn't previously show storm potential, I explained. It's rare, but it can create severe weather with very little advance warning. The concept was troubling because it described exactly the kind of weather development that João had been warning us about: storms that grew from ocean conditions rather than atmospheric patterns visible on satellite imagery. But the weather model gave the rapid cyclogenesis possibility only a 20% probability, and even if it occurred, the predicted timing was still 48 to 72 hours away. We would be in Buenos Aires long before any such development could affect us. Should we alter course or speed? Anna asked, recognizing that even a small probability of severe weather deserved consideration in passage planning. Not based on a 20% probability forecast, I decided. But let's monitor conditions more closely and be prepared to adjust our plans if anything changes. By noon, the changes I'd been sensing became more pronounced. The barometric pressure, which had been stable for days, began dropping slowly but steadily. The wind patterns became more variable, shifting direction slightly every few hours in ways that weren't consistent with the predicted weather patterns. Most significantly, the ocean surface began showing the kind of subtle changes that João had been pointing out the day before. The water color shifted from deep blue to a slightly different shade that suggested changes in temperature or current patterns. The wave patterns became increasingly complex, with swells from multiple directions creating a confused sea state that made our motion less comfortable. This doesn't match what the weather forecast predicted, Lisa observed as she struggled to maintain a steady course through the increasingly confused seas. I called up our weather routing software and compared current conditions with the predicted conditions for our position and time. The actual wind direction was about 20 degrees off from predicted, the wave heights were larger than forecast, and the barometric pressure was dropping when it should have been stable. The forecast is starting to diverge from reality, I admitted to the crew. We need to start thinking about contingency plans. But even as I said it, I wasn't seriously considering that João's dramatic prediction could be accurate. A sudden increase in wind and wave activity was concerning, but it was a long way from the 70-knot winds and 10-meter seas that the old fisherman had predicted. At 2 p.m., our first real indication of developing severe weather came from an unexpected source: marine radio traffic from other vessels in the area. Pan, this is sailing vessel Wind Song, came a distress call on VHF Channel 16. We are experiencing severe weather approximately 100 miles southwest of Montevideo. Winds gusting to 45 knots, seas 4 to 5 meters and building rapidly. The position given by Wind Song was about 150 miles southwest of our current location, which meant that severe weather was developing in exactly the area João had predicted, and it was moving in our general direction. I immediately contacted the vessel to get more information about the conditions they were experiencing. Wind Song, this is Catamaran Esperanza. Can you describe the weather development you're seeing? Esperanza, this is Wind Song. The weather change happened very suddenly. We had moderate conditions this morning, and within 2 hours we went from 15 knots to 45 knots with confused seas and rapidly dropping pressure. The description matched exactly what João had predicted: rapid weather development that hadn't been forecast by official weather services. But it also meant that if the weather system continued moving northeast, we would encounter it within the next 12 to 18 hours. Did you receive any weather warnings for this system? I asked. Negative, Esperanza. The official forecast still shows moderate conditions for this area. Whatever this is, it wasn't predicted by the weather models. After ending the radio conversation, I called a crew meeting to discuss our options. We could alter course to the east to avoid the developing weather system, reduce speed to delay our encounter with it, or continue on our current course and hope that the severe conditions would remain localized. What do you think we should do? I asked the crew, genuinely uncertain about the best course of action. If the weather system is moving northeast and we're heading southwest, we're going to meet it head-on, Anna pointed out. Basic vector analysis says we should alter course to avoid it. Roberto was more optimistic about our situation. One boat reporting bad weather doesn't mean there's a major storm system developing. It could be a localized squall that will pass quickly. Lisa, who had the most experience with rapidly changing weather conditions, was more cautious. I've seen situations where local knowledge was more accurate than official forecasts. Maybe that old fisherman knew something we didn't. The debate continued for nearly an hour, during which our weather conditions continued to deteriorate slowly but steadily. The wind increased to 20 knots, then 25, then 30. The seas became increasingly confused, with wave heights growing from 2 meters to 3 meters to 4 meters. At 4:30 p.m., I made the decision that would define the next phase of our voyage. We're going to continue on course, I announced. But we're going to prepare for severe weather and be ready to alter our plans if conditions deteriorate further. It was a compromise decision that satisfied no one completely but seemed reasonable given the limited information we had. We would maintain our course toward Buenos Aires while preparing the boat and crew for the possibility of encountering severe weather. The preparations included checking all safety equipment, securing loose items below decks, reviewing our storm sailing procedures, and ensuring that our emergency communication equipment was functional. We also plotted alternative courses to nearby ports in case we needed to seek shelter. But as evening approached, it became clear that our compromised decision might not be adequate for the conditions we were about to face. At 6:45 p.m., our barometer readings began dropping rapidly, from 1,018 millibars to 1,012 millibars in less than 2 hours. The wind speed increased to 35 knots with gusts to 45 knots. Most ominously, the wave heights jumped from 4 meters to 6 meters in the span of an hour. This is happening a lot faster than any weather model predicted, Anna observed as she plotted our deteriorating conditions on our weather chart. By 8 p.m., we were experiencing conditions that were approaching the severity that João had predicted. The wind was gusting to 50 knots, the seas had built to 7 meters, and our barometer showed a pressure drop that indicated we were in the path of a rapidly intensifying storm system. We need to start thinking about this as a survival situation, I told the crew as we struggled to maintain control of the Esperanza in increasingly dangerous conditions. But it was already too late to avoid the storm. We were committed to riding it out in one of the most unforgiving ocean areas in the world, with weather conditions that were exceeding even João's dramatic predictions. The old fisherman had been right about everything: the timing, the intensity, and the rapid development of a storm system that our modern weather technology had failed to detect until it was too late to avoid. We had laughed at his warning less than 48 hours earlier. Now we were fighting for our lives in exactly the conditions he had predicted, and we weren't laughing anymore. By 10 p.m. on March 23rd, we were experiencing conditions that challenged everything I thought I knew about storm sailing. The wind had increased to sustained 60 knots with gusts exceeding 70 knots, exactly what João had predicted. The seas had built to 8 to 9 meters with occasional waves approaching 12 meters, creating conditions that pushed our 58-foot catamaran to the absolute limits of its design capabilities. "This is the most severe weather I've ever experienced," Anna shouted over the roar of wind and waves as we struggled to maintain control of the Esperanza. "The boat is handling it, but I don't know for how long." We had reduced sail to just a storm jib and were running before the wind at whatever speed the conditions dictated. The twin hulls of the catamaran were providing excellent stability, but the sheer size of the waves was creating situations where the boat would surf down wave faces at speeds approaching 20 knots, then slam into the back of the next wave with impacts that shook the entire structure. "We need to deploy a drogue to slow us down," I decided, recognizing that our current speed through the water was becoming dangerous. "If we keep surfing these waves at this speed, we're going to pitch pole or break something critical." Deploying a drogue in 70-knot winds and 9-meter seas was one of the most dangerous operations we could attempt, but allowing the boat to continue surfing uncontrolled down wave faces was even more dangerous. Roberto and I worked together to deploy the series drogue from our stern, while Anna and Lisa maintained control of the helm. The process took nearly 30 minutes of dangerous work on the pitching stern of the catamaran, during which we were repeatedly soaked by breaking waves and constantly at risk of being swept overboard. But when the drogue finally set properly, it immediately reduced our speed and gave us much better control over our motion through the massive seas. "That's better," Lisa reported from the helm. "We're still moving fast, but at least we're not completely out of control." But our sense of having regained some control was short-lived. At 11:30 p.m., we encountered a wave that was significantly larger than anything we'd seen during the storm. What mariners call a rogue wave, probably 15 meters from trough to crest, moving with the devastating power that only the ocean can generate. "Hold on," I shouted as I saw the massive wave approaching our stern, but there was nothing any of us could do except grip whatever handholds we could find and hope that the Esperanza could survive the impact. The wave lifted our stern so high that the bow pointed almost straight down into the trough ahead of us. For a terrifying moment, I thought we were going to pitch pole, flip end over end, which would have been fatal for everyone aboard. But the catamaran's design saved us, and instead of flipping, we surfed down the wave face at nearly 25 knots. The impact when we hit the back of the next wave was like hitting a concrete wall. The entire boat shuddered, equipment flew around the cabin, and I heard the distinctive sound of something structural giving way under the enormous stress. "Damage report," I called out as soon as the boat stabilized from the impact. "We've got water coming into the port hull," Anna reported after a quick inspection. "Looks like the impact damaged one of the hull-to-deck joints. It's not catastrophic, but we're taking on water." The hull damage was serious but not immediately life-threatening. Catamarans have tremendous reserve buoyancy, and even with one hull partially flooded, the Esperanza would remain afloat. But the damage was progressive. The more water that entered the hull, the more stress would be placed on the remaining structural connections. "Can we patch it?" Roberto asked, already moving toward our emergency repair supplies. "Not in these conditions," I replied, recognizing that any repair attempts would have to wait until the storm abated. "All we can do is monitor the flooding and pump when we can." But our problems were compounding faster than we could address them. The hull damage was affecting our stability, making the boat's motion through the waves more violent and unpredictable. The increased motion was creating additional stress on all our systems, and I could hear rigging components beginning to fail under the enormous loads. At 1 a.m. on March 24th, our situation became critical when our steering system failed. The combination of massive wave impacts and the increased loads from our drogue had overwhelmed the hydraulic steering system, leaving us with no ability to control our direction through the storm. In 70-knot winds and 10-meter seas, loss of steering meant we were completely at the mercy of conditions that were already pushing us beyond our survival limits. "We need to rig emergency steering," I told the crew, though I knew that rigging an emergency tiller in these conditions would be nearly impossible. Emergency steering on a catamaran requires accessing the rudder stock, which is located at the stern of each hull in an area that was being constantly swept by breaking waves. The work would require someone to go outside the relative safety of the cockpit and work with tools and conditions that were lethal to anyone who wasn't properly secured. Anna volunteered for the job, using her engineering background to jury-rig a tiller system that would give us basic steering control. The work took over an hour, during which she was repeatedly knocked down by breaking waves and constantly at risk of being swept overboard. "I've got something rigged," Anna finally reported, exhausted from the effort. "It's not pretty, but we should have basic steering control." The emergency steering gave us some ability to control our heading, but it required constant attention and physical strength that was being depleted by hours of fighting the storm. Each of us took turns at the emergency tiller, but the physical demands were enormous, and we were all showing signs of exhaustion. By 3 a.m., we had been battling severe conditions for over 5 hours, and the crew was beginning to reach the limits of physical and psychological endurance. The constant noise, violent motion, and danger were taking their toll on everyone's ability to think clearly and respond effectively to emergencies. "How much longer can this last?" Roberto asked during a brief lull in the wind. "I don't know," I admitted, recognizing that our survival now depended more on the storm's duration than on our ability to handle whatever it threw at us. But the storm wasn't finished with us. At 4:30 a.m., we encountered the most dangerous moment of the entire ordeal when a breaking wave filled our cockpit and temporarily disabled our emergency steering. The wall of water hit us from the port side with enough force to knock all of us down and fill the cockpit with thousands of gallons of seawater. For several terrifying seconds, the Esperanza was completely out of control, broaching sideways to the waves in a position that could have resulted in a catastrophic rollover. "Get the helm," I shouted to Lisa, who was closest to the emergency tiller, but the cockpit was so full of water that she couldn't reach the controls. For what seemed like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, we were completely helpless as the catamaran wallowed broadside to 10-meter waves. If another large wave had hit us during those seconds, it would have rolled us over and probably killed everyone aboard. But the cockpit drains finally cleared the water, Lisa regained control of the steering, and we managed to get the boat back on course before another large wave could catch us in the vulnerable broadside position. "That was too close," Anna said, voicing what we were all thinking. By dawn on March 24th, We had survived the most intense part of the storm, but we were in desperate condition. The port hull was taking on increasing amounts of water, our steering system was jury-rigged and barely functional, and the crew was exhausted to the point where our decision-making was becoming impaired. But most importantly, we were still alive. Joao's prediction had been accurate in every detail: timing, wind speed, wave height, and the rapid development that had caught official weather services completely off guard. "Do you think that old fisherman knew this was coming?" Roberto asked as we assessed our damage in the gray light of dawn. "He knew exactly what was coming," I replied, finally understanding the difference between meteorological knowledge and the wisdom that comes from 60 years of reading ocean conditions. We had dismissed Joao's warning because it didn't match our computer models and satellite data. But he had been reading signs that our technology couldn't detect. Subtle changes in water color, bird behavior, and wave patterns that indicated major weather development long before it became visible to satellites or predictable by computer models. Now, as we limped toward the nearest port with a damaged boat and a crew that had been pushed to the limits of endurance, I understood that traditional knowledge and modern technology weren't competing systems. They were complementary sources of information that should be used together. We had laughed at the old man's warning because we thought our electronic systems made his traditional methods obsolete. But in the end, his 60 years of observing ocean conditions had provided more accurate weather information than all our satellite communications and computer modeling combined. The storm had taught us humility, but it had also taught us respect for the knowledge that comes from a lifetime of working with natural forces that don't care about human confidence or technological sophistication. By 8 a.m. on March 24th, the worst of the storm had passed, leaving us with 30-knot winds and 5-meter seas, conditions that would have seemed severe under normal circumstances but felt almost calm after what we'd experienced during the night. The Esperanza was still afloat and basically seaworthy, but she was severely damaged. The port hull was taking on water faster than our manual pumps could handle, forcing us to run our electric bilge pumps continuously to prevent progressive flooding. Our steering system was held together with emergency repairs that could fail at any moment. Most critically, our rigging had sustained damage that limited our ability to carry sail efficiently. "We need to make for the nearest port," I announced to the crew as we assessed our situation in the gray dawn light. "We can't continue to Buenos Aires in this condition." Our options were limited. Montevideo was about 200 miles to the northwest, but reaching it would require sailing across the same weather system that had just battered us. Punta del Este was closer at about 150 miles, but the approach required navigating through shallow coastal waters in our damaged condition. "What about Mar del Plata?" Ana suggested, referring to the Argentine port about 180 miles to the southwest. "It's got good repair facilities and should be reachable even with our current limitations." After studying our charts and weather information, I decided that Mar del Plata offered our best combination of reasonable distance, safe approach, and adequate repair facilities. But getting there would require at least 24 hours of sailing in our damaged condition, assuming no further deterioration of our systems. The passage to Mar del Plata tested every repair we'd made during the storm and revealed additional damage that hadn't been apparent during the height of the emergency. Our port hull continued taking on water, requiring constant monitoring and pumping. The emergency steering system required constant adjustment and occasional repair. Several pieces of rigging failed during the passage, forcing us to reduce sail area even further. But perhaps the most significant challenge was psychological. After surviving conditions that had pushed us to the absolute limits of our capabilities, the crew was dealing with the emotional aftermath of genuine terror and the recognition of how close we'd come to losing our lives. "I've never been that scared," Roberto admitted during one of our watches. "There were moments when I thought we weren't going to make it." Lisa nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "When that big wave filled the cockpit and we lost steering, I thought that was it. I thought we were going to roll over and that would be the end of us." Ana, who had risked her life to repair our steering system, was dealing with her own reaction to the extreme conditions. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd been swept overboard while working on the rudder. You guys would have been helpless to rescue me." The conversations were necessary for processing what we'd experienced, but they also highlighted how unprepared we'd been for the psychological demands of survival sailing. Our training and experience had focused on technical skills and equipment, but we'd given little thought to the mental and emotional challenges of facing life-threatening conditions. At 2 p.m. on March 25th, we finally arrived at Mar del Plata harbor, exhausted and relieved to be back in protected waters. The port captain who met us at the dock took one look at our damaged catamaran and our exhausted crew and immediately understood that we'd survived something extraordinary. Ustedes paran por una tormenta muy fuerte, he said in Spanish, recognizing that we'd been through a severe storm. We heard radio reports about unusual weather conditions offshore, but the official forecasts didn't predict anything like what you obviously experienced. His comment confirmed what we'd learned during our ordeal. The storm that had nearly killed us hadn't been predicted by official weather services and had caught other vessels in the area just as unprepared as we'd been. Over the next several days, as we arranged for repairs to the Esperanza and recovered from our ordeal, we learned more about the weather system that had nearly claimed our lives. The storm had been what meteorologists call a bomb cyclone, a rapidly intensifying low-pressure system that had developed from conditions that weren't apparent in satellite data or computer models. The system had formed over unusually warm water associated with a deep ocean current, creating perfect conditions for explosive cyclogenesis. This type of rapid weather development is very difficult to predict using current forecasting methods, explained Dr. Carlos Mendez, a meteorologist at the Argentine Weather Service who interviewed us about our experience. The conditions that trigger rapid cyclogenesis often occur below the ocean surface, where satellites can't detect them. Dr. Mendez's explanation validated everything João had tried to tell us about reading ocean conditions rather than relying solely on atmospheric data. The old fishermen's traditional methods had detected signs of changing ocean conditions that our electronic weather systems had missed completely. Local fishermen often have access to information that doesn't appear in official forecasts, Dr. Mendez continued. They observe water temperature, current patterns, marine life behavior, and other indicators that can signal weather changes before they become apparent through conventional meteorology. The recognition that traditional knowledge could provide more accurate weather information than modern technology was humbling, but it was also educational. Our near-death experience had taught us that effective seamanship required combining all available sources of information, not just the ones that came through electronic systems. 2 weeks later, as repairs to the Esperanza neared completion, I received an unexpected visitor at our hotel in Mar del Plata. João Mendoza, the old fisherman whose warning we had dismissed, had somehow learned about our experience and had traveled from Montevideo to speak with us. Capitão, João said when I met him in the hotel lobby, I heard on the radio that you encountered the storm I warned you about. Are you and your crew safe? The concern in his voice was genuine, and I realized that his original warning hadn't been about proving his superior knowledge. It had been about preventing exactly what we'd experienced. We're all safe, I replied, but only because we were lucky and the boat was strong enough to handle conditions that were worse than anything I'd ever experienced. João nodded, understanding that survival in severe weather often depends as much on luck as on skill or equipment. The storm was very bad, he said. Several fishing boats were damaged and 2 had to be rescued by the Coast Guard. Over the next hour, João explained the traditional methods he used to predict weather changes, knowledge that had been passed down through 4 generations of fishermen in his family. The techniques involved observing subtle changes in water color, wave patterns, bird behavior, and ocean temperature that indicated developing weather systems long before they became apparent through conventional meteorology. Your machines see the air, João explained patiently. But storms sometimes begin in the water, with temperature changes and current patterns that create conditions for rapid weather development. He showed me how to recognize the watercolor changes that indicate shifting ocean temperatures, how to interpret the behavior of seabirds that can sense atmospheric pressure changes before instruments detect them, and how to read wave patterns that reveal the presence of distant weather systems. This knowledge saved my father and his father, João continued. But young fishermen today trust their electronics more than their eyes, and sometimes they pay a terrible price for that trust. The conversation was both educational and humbling. João wasn't dismissing modern technology. He acknowledged that satellite communications and GPS navigation had made fishing safer and more efficient. But he was emphasizing that traditional knowledge and modern technology should work together, not replace each other. When your machines and the old ways disagree, João advised, always choose the more careful path. Electronics can fail, but the ocean never lies about what it's going to do. Before leaving Mar del Plata, João gave me a final piece of advice that would influence my approach to seamanship for the rest of my career. Pride is the most dangerous thing you can carry on a boat, he said. The ocean doesn't care about your experience or your education. It only cares whether you're smart enough to listen to what it's trying to tell you. The repairs to the Esperanza took 3 weeks and cost nearly $80,000, most of which was covered by insurance that fortunately included coverage for storm damage. But the boat that emerged from the shipyard was stronger and better equipped than before, with improved pumping systems, backup steering arrangements, and enhanced emergency equipment. More importantly, the crew that resumed the voyage to Buenos Aires was fundamentally changed by our experience. We'd learned that modern sailing technology, while extremely valuable, wasn't sufficient to guarantee safety in extreme conditions. We discovered that traditional knowledge could provide critical information that wasn't available through electronic systems. Most significantly, we'd gained respect for natural forces that could overwhelm even the best equipment and most experienced crews. "I'll never dismiss local weather knowledge again," Ana said as we finally completed our delivery to Puerto Madero in Buenos Aires. "That old fisherman probably saved our lives by trying to warn us, even though we were too arrogant to listen." Roberto agreed, adding that the experience had taught him the importance of humility in dealing with the ocean. "We thought our technology and experience made us immune to surprises," he said. "But the ocean doesn't care what we think we know." Lisa, who had previous experience with rapidly changing weather conditions, noted that our ordeal had reinforced lessons she'd learned in other parts of the world. Local knowledge is always worth listening to, even when it contradicts official forecasts. The people who work in an area every day often see things that outsiders miss. 6 months after our encounter with the storm off Uruguay, I found myself back in Montevideo, preparing for another yacht delivery that would take me through the same waters where we'd nearly lost our lives. But this time, my approach to weather planning was fundamentally different. Instead of relying solely on satellite forecasts and computer models, I spent 3 days interviewing local fishermen about current ocean conditions, seasonal weather patterns, and the subtle signs that indicated changing conditions. The conversations provided information that wasn't available through any electronic system. "The water temperature has been unusual this month," explained Carlos Vega, a fisherman who'd been working out of Montevideo for over 30 years. "Warmer than normal for this time of year, which can create conditions for rapid weather development." The information was exactly the kind of local knowledge that João had tried to share with us 6 months earlier. Water temperature changes that weren't reflected in official forecasts but could indicate conditions favorable for storm development. "What other signs should I watch for?" I asked, genuinely interested in learning the traditional methods that complemented modern weather technology. Carlos spent the next hour teaching me to observe wave patterns that indicated distant weather systems, recognize cloud formations that suggested rapid atmospheric changes, and interpret the behavior of marine life that could sense pressure changes before instruments detected them. "Birds are usually the first to know when weather is changing," Carlos explained. "If you see them flying in unusual patterns or directions, it's worth paying attention to what else is happening with the ocean and atmosphere." The education continued over several days, during which I met with other experienced fishermen who shared their methods for reading ocean conditions. The knowledge was remarkably consistent. Multiple sources describing the same techniques for detecting weather changes through observation of natural indicators. But the most valuable lesson came from an unexpected source. Dr. Isabel Rodriguez, a marine meteorologist at the University of Uruguay who had been studying the integration of traditional knowledge with modern forecasting methods. "Traditional weather knowledge and scientific meteorology aren't competing systems," Dr. Rodriguez explained during our meeting. "They're complementary approaches that can provide a more complete picture of developing conditions when used together." Dr. Rodriguez showed me research data that demonstrated how traditional weather signs could provide early warning of rapid cyclogenesis events that weren't detected by conventional forecasting methods. The same water temperature and current changes that local fishermen observed were now being studied as potential predictors of explosive storm development. "The storm you encountered 6 months ago is being used as a case study for improving rapid cyclogenesis forecasting," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "Your experience, combined with the traditional knowledge of fishermen like João Mendoza, is helping us develop better prediction methods." The revelation that our near-death experience was contributing to improved weather forecasting was gratifying, but it also reinforced the importance of respecting traditional knowledge that had been developed over generations of direct observation. "Local fishermen observe ocean conditions every day for decades," Dr. Rodriguez noted. "They develop a sensitivity to subtle changes that can be extremely valuable for weather prediction, especially for phenomena that develop rapidly from oceanic rather than atmospheric conditions." Armed with both traditional knowledge and modern technology, I approached the new yacht delivery with much greater confidence in my ability to detect and avoid dangerous weather. The passage from Montevideo to Rio de Janeiro was completed without incident, but the experience reinforced the value of integrating multiple sources of weather information. A year after our original encounter with João, I established a new protocol for all my yacht deliveries, systematic consultation with local fishermen in addition to review of official weather forecasts. The protocol had already prevented 2 potential encounters with rapidly developing weather systems that weren't adequately predicted by conventional forecasting methods. It's like having an additional weather service that specializes in local conditions, Anna observed during one of our subsequent deliveries. The fishermen see things that satellites miss, and they're usually more conservative about weather risks than official forecasts. The integration of traditional and modern weather knowledge had become standard practice for our delivery operation, and we'd begun sharing the approach with other professional mariners. The response from the sailing community was enthusiastic, with many captains reporting improved weather decision-making after incorporating local knowledge into their planning process. 2 years after our storm encounter, I received an invitation that brought the story full circle. The Brazilian Navy's Meteorological Service was hosting a conference on integrating traditional and scientific weather knowledge, and they wanted me to speak about our experience and the lessons we'd learned. Your encounter with the rapid cyclogenesis event off Uruguay has become an important case study, explained Captain Marina Santos, the naval meteorologist who organized the conference. It demonstrates both the limitations of current forecasting technology and the value of traditional observation methods. The conference included presentations by meteorologists, marine scientists, and experienced mariners from throughout South America. But the most compelling presentations came from traditional fishermen who shared their methods for reading ocean conditions and predicting weather changes. João Mendoza was the keynote speaker, presenting the traditional knowledge that had been passed down through his family for 4 generations. His presentation included the same techniques he'd tried to share with us 2 years earlier, but now they were being presented to an audience of scientists and professionals who understood their value. The ocean speaks to those who know how to listen, João told the conference audience. Modern technology is very valuable, but it must be combined with the wisdom that comes from direct observation and respect for natural forces. During my own presentation, I described our experience in detail, emphasizing how our dismissal of traditional knowledge had nearly resulted in the loss of our vessel and crew. The presentation concluded with the protocols we developed for integrating local fishermen's knowledge with official weather forecasts. Traditional knowledge isn't superstition, I told the conference. It's accumulated wisdom based on generations of direct observation. When combined with modern technology, it provides a more complete and accurate picture of developing weather conditions. The conference resulted in new protocols for several South American naval services, incorporating systematic consultation with local fishermen into official weather forecasting procedures. The protocols were already showing promise for improving prediction of rapid weather development in coastal areas. But perhaps the most significant outcome of the conference was personal. João approached me after my presentation to offer his assessment of how much my understanding had changed since our original encounter. "You have learned to listen," João said simply. "That is the most important skill for anyone who works on the ocean." 3 years after laughing at the old man's warning, I understood that he had been offering me something far more valuable than weather information. He had been sharing the wisdom that comes from a lifetime of respecting natural forces that are larger and more powerful than human technology or pride. We had laughed at his warning because we thought our modern equipment made his traditional methods obsolete. But we'd learned that effective seamanship requires humility, respect for local knowledge, and the understanding that technology is a tool, not a replacement for wisdom. The storm that had nearly killed us had been predicted by an old fisherman using methods developed over centuries of direct observation. Our sophisticated weather technology had missed it completely. The lesson wasn't that technology was useless, but that it was incomplete without the wisdom that comes from understanding natural forces on their own terms. 5 years after our encounter with the storm off Uruguay, I stood on the deck of a new 65-foot catamaran, preparing for another delivery voyage from Rio to Buenos Aires. But this time, my first stop wasn't the weather center or the electronic forecast services. It was the fishing harbor, where I spent 2 hours talking with local fishermen about current ocean conditions. "Water temperature is normal for this time of year," reported Miguel Santos, a fisherman whose family had been working these waters for 3 generations. "Bird patterns are regular, and the currents are running as expected. Should be good sailing weather for the next several days." The consultation with local fishermen had become as routine as checking satellite weather data, and it had proven valuable for dozens of subsequent voyages. The integration of traditional and modern weather knowledge had eliminated several potential encounters with dangerous conditions and improved the safety and efficiency of our delivery operations. But the most important change was philosophical. I'd learned that expertise in seamanship required continuous learning and respect for knowledge sources that couldn't be captured by electronic systems. The ocean was constantly changing, and understanding those changes required both technological tools and the wisdom that comes from direct observation. The old man was right about everything, Anna reflected as we prepared to depart Rio for what would be our 10th delivery through the same waters where we'd nearly lost our lives. The timing, the intensity, the rapid development, he saw it all coming when our computers missed it completely. Roberto, who had become one of the most safety-conscious mariners I'd ever worked with, agreed. That experience taught me that the most dangerous thing on any boat is overconfidence. The ocean doesn't care about your experience or equipment if you're not paying attention to what it's trying to tell you. Lisa had used the lessons from our storm encounter to develop a new approach to passage planning that incorporated multiple sources of weather information, including traditional knowledge, official forecasts, and direct observation of current conditions. Every weather decision should be based on all available information, Lisa explained to new crew members. Satellites, computers, local knowledge, and your own observations. When they all agree, you can proceed with confidence. When they disagree, you choose the most conservative option. The protocols we developed were now being used by yacht delivery companies throughout South America, and several maritime schools had incorporated our case study into their curricula. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that other mariners were avoiding the kind of near disaster we'd experienced by respecting traditional knowledge along with modern technology. João Mendoza had passed away the previous year at age 72, still fishing the waters he'd known since childhood. But his grandson, Miguel Mendoza, was continuing the family tradition of sharing weather knowledge with mariners who were wise enough to listen. My grandfather always said that the ocean teaches those who are humble enough to learn, Miguel told me during my last visit to Montevideo. He was proud that his warning helped you survive the storm, and he was even more proud that you learned to respect the knowledge that comes from working with the sea. The legacy of that storm encounter had spread far beyond our personal experience. The case study was being used by meteorological services to improve rapid cyclogenesis forecasting. Maritime training programs were incorporating traditional weather knowledge into their curricula. Most importantly, a new generation of mariners was learning to combine respect for traditional wisdom with confidence in modern technology. But for me, the most lasting lesson was personal. I'd learned that true expertise required humility, that effective leadership meant listening to all available sources of information, and that survival often depended on respecting knowledge that couldn't be quantified or downloaded. We had laughed at the old man's warning because we thought our technology and experience made us superior to traditional methods. But we'd learned that wisdom comes from understanding the limitations of our knowledge and remaining open to learning from sources we might initially dismiss. The storm that had nearly killed us had been one of the most terrifying experiences of our lives, but it had also been one of the most educational. It had taught us that the ocean doesn't respect degrees, certifications, or electronic equipment. It only responds to those who are wise enough to listen to what it's trying to say. 5 years later, as we sailed through the same waters where we'd nearly lost everything, I carried with me the knowledge that had been shared by a 68-year-old fisherman who understood ocean conditions better than any satellite or computer model. It was knowledge that had been earned through a lifetime of direct observation, passed down through generations of men who had learned to read the sea's moods and respect its power. We had laughed at the old man's warning. But he had the last laugh, because his traditional methods had provided more accurate weather information than all our modern technology combined. The lesson wasn't that technology was worthless, but that it was incomplete without the wisdom that comes from understanding natural forces on their own terms. Sometimes the most important forecast comes not from satellites or computers, but from weathered hands pointing at subtle changes in wave patterns that indicate storms brewing beyond the horizon. Sometimes the most valuable navigation aid isn't GPS or radar, but the accumulated wisdom of people who have learned to read the ocean's language through decades of careful observation. The storm had taught us that there are many ways to read the sea, and the wisest mariners learned to use them all.